Earthbound, originally released in Japan as Mother 2 in August of '94. It would come to the States as Earthbound in June of '95, and is currently available today on the Nintendo Switch through the Nintendo Switch Online's $20 tier. Earthbound is a JRPG, and was originally released on the Super Nintendo, which was home to many great JRPGs. Earthbound set itself apart from its contemporaries by having a modern setting, having many sci-fi and even Lovecraftian elements laced throughout, and most uniquely for the time, it had an ever-present sense of humor. The game starts with a meteor crashing near the home of our protagonist, Ness. He and his childhood friend, Pokey, go to investigate this meteor, at which point a talking bee emerges from the meteor and explains that Ness is the chosen hero to fight an alien menace that threatens all of mankind. He then helps you fight off an alien robot, displaying impressive psychic abilities that Ness will develop in the future, and then is taken out of the picture by a middle-aged woman swatting at him, because the psychic powers he had were enough to fight a robot, but not quite up to protecting him from a hand. It's worth noting that this is where Ness starts out on his own to save the world. It is at this point that Ness starts out on his adventure to save the world. His friend Pokey does not come with him, but instead shows up repeatedly through the game as a recurring antagonist. But anyway, Ness is off. He has to go to 8 locations to record sounds that will in some way help save the world. Conveniently, the first of these locations is in his hometown, but he can't go directly there, and not being able to go directly to these locations is going to become a trend throughout the game. In this case, before he can get to the first location, he's going to need to stop the street gang that patrols his hometown. Later on, you might have to deal with a cult, do a trading sequence with monkeys, go inside of a man that has turned himself into a dungeon, help a band get out of a contract, and any number of other things that really make no sense out of context. Combat in this game has some interesting quirks to it, as despite being a 16-bit RPG, there are no random encounters. You see exactly what enemies you're going to be facing in each combat encounter before it happens, and the fact you can see your enemies beforehand does give you the chance to avoid combat if you're so inclined. In combat, you don't instantly lose your hit points or psychic points. They steadily roll down when you lose them. So if damage hasn't finished ticking down by the time combat is over, you don't end up taking all of that damage. This is useful, however it only really comes into play late in the game when you have hundreds of hit points. If you become strong enough, enemies will try to actively avoid you and run from you before combat starts. If you still pursue them, you can oftentimes beat them without having to engage in combat. You just instantly receive the experience. To go along with the modern setting, you don't cast spells in combat. Instead, 3 of your 4 characters have psychic powers. These are functionally the same as spells in other games, as you can heal, attack, affect different stats. The one character that is without psychic powers instead has various inventory items that basically fill the same roles. And that actually leads to one of the harder things to deal with in this game, the incredibly limited inventory. Each of your 4 characters only has 14 inventory slots, 4 of which will be taken up by their equipment, and some of which will be taken up by items you simply need to have with you. Ness, for example, always needs to have his ATM card with him, along with the sound stone to record at the 8 locations, and a map, and other items that serve limited functions but are necessary, like the pencil eraser. And the game frequently compounds your problem of inventory by giving you items that you seemingly need, but not very much. Like at one point, you get an item called the Bad Key Machine, which you're told will unlock locks. However, there's only actually 2 locks in the game it will unlock. And after it unlocks both of them, it doesn't disappear from your inventory. so you'll frequently need to call up a service to pick up items from you. There's some chance that the delivery person will not show up. And when they do show up, they can only take 3 items at a time. And even when they do show up, they take their sweet time, hence their name, Escargot Express. But that is all part of the humor and personality of the world, which this game is overflowing with. Every NPC and location has a lot of personality and quirky humor to it. But oddly, personality is almost completely absent from your 4 playable characters. Ness, Paula, Jeff, and Pooh, who all have distinct roles in combat, but out in the world, when dealing with NPCs, it's very rare for any of them to have a line of dialogue. And there is a mechanic in play for Ness, the main character, where he becomes homesick and needs to call his mother, but the other 3 characters don't seem to suffer from this at any point. Paula seemed to have a pretty good relationship with her parents. I'm sure she'd miss them at some point. Jeff seemed basically estranged from his father, but he seemed pretty close to his roommate at the boarding school. It just seems odd that they never need to make any phone calls. The same way that it seems odd that in a world brimming with humor and personality, you'd make your 4 protagonists the de facto straight men. So is Earthbound worth your time and money? Well, your only option to play it at this point is through a subscription service, which will cost $20 a year. Earthbound itself is a 30 to 40 hour game, so if you were to pay for 1 year of the online service, you would definitely be able to finish Earthbound in that time. And of course, that would give you access to any number of other games that are worth playing. But to shift focus back to specifically Earthbound, it is absolutely worth that $20 to experience this game, as Earthbound is still a fairly unique experience. In the 30 years since its release, it has become more popular and more influential, but despite that, there are still very few games that really are like Earthbound. A game that is oftentimes completely absurd, but always stays true to its own internal logic. By the end of it, you will have stopped an alien menace. But you'll still have questions. What exactly were Mr. Saturn's? What did the Orange Kid do with the money I invested? Did the Runaway Five ever successfully negotiate a contract? And ultimately, you'll never have answers to these questions. But it's kinda like real life. You have these encounters with people and events, many of which don't make total sense. But that's just all part of the experience. So yes, I absolutely recommend Earthbound. And if it seems like an overwhelming experience, it is worth noting that Nintendo did release the original Player's Guide as a free PDF that you can download. The Player's Guide was originally bundled with the North American release of Earthbound, and much like the game itself, it's filled with weird humor, making it worth reading all by itself. Please do subscribe, comment, like, and tell your friends.